All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Ayin Tes. We had in the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Ches Amud Beis the rule that when nitma basar, even though the chelav is kayam, being like we learned in Rashi, Iker Pesach la'achila ka'asi, then even according to Rabbi Eliezer, says the Mishnah, Eino Yizoyrek Hasadam. And on that we had Amar of Gidel Amar Rav in the beginning of the Gemara, that the Mishnah is meduyak. The Mishnah doesn't say that it's possible. The Mishnah says that one should not throw the blood. However, in Zajac, hurza, and the person is exempted from bringing a Pesach Sheni. Now, yesterday on Daf Ayin Ches Amud Beis, the Gemara was saying that Rav follows the Shita, the Tana Rebbe Nassim, and today on Daf Ayin Tes, we're going to show that there's another source for Shitas Rav, and that will be the Shita of Rabbi Yehoshua, as we will learn. The Mishnah that we're going to have on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Aleph is going to be describing the specific or the detailed circumstances in which the Pesach may be offered betuma. And as we spoke it out ourselves, it's both if Roiv of the Kahal is Tamei, even if the Roiv of the Kahal are Tohaidim, but if Roiv Kaihanim are Tamei, that's also called Tuma, and Pesach is brought betuma. And even if only the Klesharis, if the utensils that are needed to be used are Tamei, then the Pesach is also going to be brought Pesach Rishon betuma. However, on that says Rab Chizda Gavaldik Chiddush, that if, for example, the majority of the chalifs of the sakinim that are needed are tamei with corpse tuma, as we'll see details, for sure, that's exactly what the Mishnah is saying, then the Pesach is also brought betuma, because the kalim are tamei anyways, and they're going to make, we'll see, both the meat and the people tamei. But if the sakinim are tamei betuma sheretz, which means the sakinim have the status of a rishon, the sakinim will be metame the basar. The basar of the kachum will become tame, but the people will not become tame, guys. This is what we learned at the end of the first chapter. That's something that's tame on the level of a rishon. Biblically, cannot be metame, cannot transfer tumah to a person. So says Rab Chizda, the majority of people, the minority of the people that are Tamei Meis may not come and bring the Korban Pesach Rishon, even though there's going to be Tumah. But just because we're going to set aside, and yes, Pesach will be brought on the lower level of Tumah, when the Basar is Tamei, that will not, so to say, dispose of, overpower the Tumas Adam with the details that we'll see in the Gemara. The rest of today's daf is going to be the following. It's going to begin on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Aleph in the bottom. What happens if you have exactly 50-50? Not to Roif to Hoidim, not to Roif to Meir, a theoretical question. If exactly half of the people are Tahar and half of the Yidden are Tamei. So we're going to have a two-way machlokes that becomes a three-way machlokes. It begins as a machlokes between Rav and Rav Kahana, but then we're going to have two versions as to what Rav Kahana said. So we're going to have three opinions. We're going to find a braisa to back up each one of these three opinions. And the Gemara is going to point out almost perfectly that each one of the other opinions won't have to side only with one braisa. There will be a way for them to learn pshat in the other braisa that it should not contradict their opinion. If we'll have time, we'll start a new braisa, which gives a few more details, mamash on the bottom of Ayin Tes Amud Beis in the bottom, that already goes into Daf Pei. For example, how do you define majority? So if you were to have, let's say, 10, 6-4, right? If you have 600,000 Jews, so it's not 300,000, it's 300,001 versus 299, says one shita, Rabbi Elazar ben Masya, that ein hayachid machriya es hatzibur l'tuma. Very interesting. It has to be a majority of more than one. I know we have this sometimes by Din and Nefashos by the Sanhedrin. We're going to have very interesting halachas already on Daf Pes, on Daf Pei. We're going to have the concept. What happens if the majority of one shevet is tamei? Do we view each shevet? Could we view each shevet separately? This is something that we will also have in Masechtas Hoidiyas if Hoiru Bezdin and the Roif Kahal followed an erroneous ruling. Remember that whole sugya, whether the Kahal is viewed by the entirety of the Jewish people, or do we view each tribe separately, and many more pratim in that. But Chevra, let us start. We left off mamash on top of Daf Ayin Tes V'i Bo Yesema. So Nachamal, the Mishnah says Nitma Basar, even though the Chelav is Kayim, even according to the Tana Rabbi Eliezer, that Dam Afal Pisha Ein Basar, but everyone agrees, like Rashi says, that Ikar Pesach LaAchila. So therefore, the Mishnah says, if the people cannot eat the Korban Pesach from the outset, stop the avodah. Don't even throw the blood. On that says, Amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav. Okay, the Mishnah doesn't say that it's possible. The Mishnah only says, which means lachatchila. But the Diavad, right, post facto, says Rav, and then it says Rav Gidol Amar Rav, Imzara Kurza. Imzara Kurza actually means that even though no one will eat the Korban Pesach, but after the fact, the Zrika was done, even though Iker Pesach Lachila Kaasi, nevertheless, they fulfilled their obligation. They won't have to bring a Pesach Sheni. We were looking for a source for Rav. Yesterday we said it's Rav Nassan, and now the Iba Yesema guys on top of the Amid Ayin Tes, that Rav will hold like Rabbi or Yeshua. Another option, again, Rabbi Yeshua will be the Shita that holds that eating the Korban Pesach, as important as it is not essential. Now, where do we have the Shita? The Tanya. Rabbi Yeshua Aimer, Kol Azvachim Shabbat Torah. So at least that which needs to go on the Mizbeach is here, or ben shenit mechelev, so it cannot go on the altar. But the basar is kayam. Rabbi Yeshua holds Zajac as Adam, and let's appreciate the statement, even though Rabbi Yeshua is the Tana that holds that in ein basar ein dam. So we already learned this. Rabbi Yeshua doesn't demand for there to be all of the basar. Rabbi Yeshua says that there has to be either or is also good enough. And by the way, either or doesn't even mean all of the chelav. It doesn't even mean all of the basar. If there is a kazayas of either or, it's good enough. It's good enough. However, when it comes to a nazir, guys, we're going to relearn nazir. What's nazir? That when the nazir finishes his count, he at the end will have to bring 3 karbanis, the chatos oila and the shlamim, with all of the pratim. Remember that he has to shave his hair, and then you put it under the pot where you cook the shlamim. In that pot, you're going to have the foreleg, right? You're going to have the zroya. And after the zroya is cooked, the zroya is going to be waved. It's part of the avodah. You know, since the zroya is part of the avodah, what were to happen if the zroya becomes tamei? Or aside of the nazir, v'oisa pesach, or when it comes to the making of a pesach, that over there, nitma chelav ubasar kayam, yes, zoyrek hadam, because the part that we need to eat is essential. However, nitma basar the chelav kayam, even though the chelav is here, but if the basar, either the zroya that is part of the avodah by the nazir from the shlamim, or the food that we have to eat from the pesach is, if that's tamei, then here clearly, again, I take back the word essential. It's very important. And lachatchila eino zoyrek es adam, but explicitly, but the im zarak hurtza, post facto, it's fine. In other words, yeah, you needed to do the avodah with the zroya and you can't. Okay, it's not essential. Eating the Korban Pesach, as important as it is not essential. Now, obviously, the chelav needed to be kayam, because if both the basar was tamei and the chelav is einoi kayam, Rabbi Yeshua is the one, we're already learning this at the third day, who holds im ein basar ein dam. However, nitmu ba'alim, another nuance that we learned yesterday, what happens if the owners become tamei with tumas meis? Here, not only lo yizroik by the Korban Pesach, but everyone will hold that even post facto v'im zarak lo yhurtza, because let's not confuse the eating according to Rabbi Yeshua. Yesterday, the eating according to the Tanach Rab Nassan. Clearly, the Amoira, the great Rav, paskins like them, is not essential. But the person who needs to eat needs to be fit. If the person is tamei, even b'diavad, then that loy hurtza, and therefore this person will be mechuyev to bring the Korban Pesach Sheni. Gewaltig. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shar kol nidbar. Gemara is referring back to the Mishnah that bimugdashin einoi kain. In other words, there even lechatchila, even if the meat is tamei, this is Rabbi Yeshua, as long as the chelav is kayam, you lechatchila throw the blood. Tak again, Rabbi Shua holds im ein basar ein dam, but you have the basar. None of the basar that's edible, I don't care. Some of the basar, says the Gemara, that our Mishnah follows tak indeed the sheet of Rabbi Yeshua. And again, clearly, the Tanya, Rabbi Yeshua says, Kol azvachim shematoyro. As long as sheneshtayr mehem, either only a kazayas of the basar that the kehanim will eat, or only a kazayas of the chalev, so then you can throw the blood. Im ein basar ein dam. In other words, we said another way of saying it yesterday. We said this out yesterday. Rabbi Yeshua needs for the blood, for the zrikas adam to be a matir. A matir means that it's not the end of the line. There are many things that can only happen after something happened prior. And indeed, you can only put the chelim on the mizbeach after you did the zrikas adam. The person can only eat, the kahanim can only eat the basar, the Yisraelim, in the cases where they have basar, they can only eat it after the zrikas adam, after the chelim is burnt. In other words, as long as the blood is a matir for either or, and not even for all of the chelim, for just a kezayis of it or more, then there's basar, and therefore there's dam. However, nuances. What happens if you have the dam, you lost or became tamei, and you have left a half a kezayis and a half a kezayis? If you have kachatzi zayis basar and a kachatzi zayis chelev, if we would have combined them, if they would be mitztaref, then you would have a kazayis. But the rule is, no, they're not mitztaref. It's different. This is achilas mizbeach. This is achilas kahanim. According to Chassidus, achilas mizbeach is the end of avodah of the birurim. Achilas kahanim is the avodah of yichudim. It's a whole different ruchnius de kavodah. You can't combine. These are two separate things. Ein zoyde kasadam, with one exception, and that is uba oila. Since by the carbon oila, no one eats the basar. This can't continue the words that we have in Chassidus. All of it is avodas birurim, both the burnings of the fats and the burning of the meats. So here, yes, zoyde kasadam, because since all of it is burnt, so therefore it combines. Now, if there's a mincha, even though all of the mincha is intact here and not tamei, lo yizrak, you don't throw the blood. Whoa. By a mincha has no blood. A mincha is you take kemitza off the mincha. So the Gemara right away asks, mincha, mayavidato, vu kumt rein blut? There's no avodas hadam, doesn't fit. No, it does fit. Explains Rav Papa. Amar Rav Papa, we're speaking about minchas nesachim. So for example, when you bring a oila and a shlamim, and they normally come along both with wine and then with a flour offering. So sal kadai techamina, you would think, no, let's go back. What happens? This is all Rabbi Yeshua. Im ein basar ein dam. But what happens if you lose the chalev, tamei? The basar becomes tamei, all before you threw the blood, but the mincha is intact. So the blood, you would argue, is still a matir, because now that you throw the blood, there was something else that needs to be done. That's the pshat. You would have thought, kiven the ka'asya mikoyach zebach, since the whole mincha, it's not a standalone mincha. We're speaking about these karbonos, menachos that come as an addition, as an extension to the animal carbon. So you would think gufei the zebach dami, and therefore the blood is a matir bizoydik the dam. That's the end of the braisa here. That if the chalev and the basar are not good, are not kosher, or not b'metzias, they're not benimsa, even though the whole mincha is here, no, im ein basar ein dam. You can't say, but there's a mincha. I don't care that there's a mincha. Kamash malan that you don't bring it. Now, chelef minolan, guys, let's not forget that the psukim that we have quoted in the beginning of the Sol Sugya, the source of Rabbi Yoshua. Remember that? The pasuk in A, that the habasar v'hadam. The psukim speak about basar dam. The pasuk never mentioned chalev. So how do you know that even if there's only chalev, you can be zaydik the dam? So Amar Rabbi Yechanan, in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, other people umatuba are inclined, or they received it in the name of Rabbi Yishmael ben Chananya. The Amar Kratak, it's not the pasuk we quoted from the A, but it's another pasuk in Achri Mois. There, the trader uses the words reach nechoyach when it comes to the burning of the fats. As a pleasant aroma to Hashem. So since we are associating the reach nechoyach haktara to the chalev afal pisha ein basar. In other words, it justifies throwing the blood, because if you're not, The chaylev gives God nachas. It's something chashuv. Okay, so the pasuk associates reach nechayach, the first white line, only to chaylev. But we know that the emurim, the word emurim comes from the word amar. Amar is that which God said needs to be burnt on the fire. It's not only the fats. Together with the fats, the Torah writes explicitly, you burn the Yeseres HaKavod, the diaphragm, you burn both kidneys, the akloyos. And the truth is that even if all of the chaylev is tamei, or nevad, or nisraf, as long as you have a kazayis from the Yeseres HaKavod, from the shtei akloyos, it also will justify, even when Rabbi Yeshua, the zrikas adam, but minolam, heicha, amrinan, the zarkinan, hold on. Counters the Gemara. Why? What are you even asking? Who even told you that you do the zirikas adam because you have a kazayis of Yeseres HaKavod and shtei akloyos? Maybe you don't. The Braisa that we just quoted only spoke about chaylev and basar. No, the Gemara says no, we do, and we can infer it from that Braisa itself, because since it says ubemincha afa pisha kol kayemes leyizrik, so let's infer from that. Oh, mincha hu deloy avol Yeseres HaKavod shtei akloyos. If you have a kazais from that, then yes, shaper dummy. So now we're back to the question. The pasuk that we quoted from Achrei Mois only speaks about chaylev. So at Minalon answers the Gemara. Rabbi Yechanan the day Amar was before Rabbi Yechanan quoted what he heard from Rabbi Yishmael. So when they asked this question, he answered himself that it says in that same pasuk l'reach nechayach kol sha'ato mala l'reach nechayach. Everything that's burnt on the altar affects a reach nechayach. So now the question is, why did the Torah in Parshas Achrei Mois have to write the word chaylev? The Torah could have written v'hiktir, which is the act of burning parts of the animals on the mizbech, l'reach nechoyach. Says the Gemara, the Torah needed to explicitly write chaylev. V'itzrach l'michtav chaylev, and v'itzrach l'michtav that it causes a reach nechoyach. The ikos of rachman chaylev havamina, only chaylev in, like we said, Yeseres HaKavod, or shtei akloyos, loy, it would not justify you throwing the dam according to the sheet of Rabbi Yeshua that imein basar ein dam. So the Torah writes l'reach nechayach. Once you hear that something gives God nachas, that's the logic here. If it's a reach nechayach, then I know imein basar ein dam, but that gives God nachas. So then throw the dam. Because of rachman reach nechayach, I would have thought not only meat, maybe even a mincha. Kol ha'olim, anything that's burnt on the altar causes reach nechayach, and it should allow you throwing the blood. Mincha brings reach nechayach. Mincha brings, we learned in the beginning of Menachos, the greatest reach nechayach, because it's a matnas ani. So when the poor man gives even something that objectively has less value, but subjectively it's harder for an ani to give flour than for a wealthy person to give an animal. Of course it's a reach nechayach. But this rule has to be im ein basar. It has to be basar. And you would think I feel a mincha, so that's why the Torah writes chaylev, to make it clear that there has to be basar l'shitas Rabbi Yeshua in order for you to be allowed to throw the dam. Okay, guys, now we're going relatively to easy street. From here until the end of the daf, we're going to learn pratim of the rule that a Pesach is brought betumah. Says the Holy Mishnah. Nitma kahal. If everyone became tamei. Now, let's just remind ourselves, we're speaking about tumas meis. We learned this earlier on. If everyone became a zav for whatever reason, then it's not deferred to Pesach Sheni. But this Mishnah is not going to go into these details. It just wants to clarify exactly who is tamei, the roiv of whom, the roiv of what is tamei for us to use this dispensation, and we can bring it betumah. It's either if everyone is tamei, or even if only rubai kekuloi, or if the Yidden are tahirim, but the Kohanim are tameim. Big machloikis here in the Rishonim. The Mishnah doesn't say rubai by the Kohanim. So some Rishonim are of the opinion that by the Kohanim it has to be everyone. And if you have the Yidden are tahirim, so what if you don't have only miyut kahanim? Let the miyut kahanim do the avodah. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of technical discussion, because if you remember the day they brought 1.2 million karbanos, you needed everyone hands on deck. So if you're missing people, the pasha technically, that's a big debate. But anyway, let's go back to the Mishnah. Even though they call our tohirim yasu b'tumah. Now yasu b'tumah means even the yechidim that are tameim bring it. Once we activate, the Pesach is brought betuma, then it's brought. You have to appreciate this. It's the Kahanim are the ones that are tummy. Roiv of the Yidden are tohoidim. Yasu betuma doesn't only mean that the people that are tar bring their carbon because the carbon will become tummy because the Kahanim are going to touch the meat. More than that, even the people that are tameim, they also bring it because we picked up this rule. This is brought betuma. Furthermore, nitma miutakol. Then, only then, not furthermore. If only the minority are tamei, then that's the rule of Pesach Sheni. The Tohoidim bring Pesach, the first Pesach Harishon, and the Tameim bring Pesach Sheni. Says the Gemara Tana Rabbanan, more details, more elaborate. Hareisha Yisrael Tameim, and here in the Braisa Yisrael doesn't only mean all. The Braisa is not arguing with the Mishnah. Even if the Roiv, even if it's not all, but if the majority of the Yidden are Tamei, and the Kohanim and the Klei Shadas are Tohoidim, that will be one case where you bring it Betuma. Another case, that the Yidden were Tohoidim, but the Kohanim and the Klei Shadas are Tameim, you bring it Betuma. Third case in the Braisa, the Yidden are Tohoidim, the Kohanim are Tohoidim. The only problem is, it's a problem, is that the Klei Shadas are Tameim. So in all of these cases, Yasu Betuma, all of the people bring it. All of the people bring it. Whether the people are Tohoidim, whether the people are Tameim, right? They bring it Betum. Why is that? I mean, why don't we say that at least the people, listen, the problem is with the Klei Shadas, but let the Tohoidim bring it and let the Tameim bring it later. You don't do that. She'ein Karben Sibur Chaluk. Communal offering that's brought in Tumah. The moment you bring it betuma, you never divide Pesach Rishon, Pesach Sheni. Now, obviously, the whole Pesach Sheni means is that if it's being brought betara, yes, we divide it. The Yechidim that are Tomei bring it on Pesach Sheni. But that's the pshat. She'ein Sibur Chal, just add these words. Whenever it's brought betuma, I don't care. It's about the people Tomei, the Kaihanim are Tomeim, the Kalim are Tomei. You bring it betuma, you don't divide anything. Everyone brings it at the same time, which is Pesach Rishon. Now comes Rab Chizda with a moide de kechiddush. Amar Rab Chizda, loy shanu that when the kelei shadis, everyone is tohoidim. The problem are with the utensils. Well, the problem is with the utensils. Just want to add another detail. Don't forget, Chavra, that even though the meat, even if the meat was not classically muchshar to become tamei, but chibas hakoidish machsharton. It's the moment the animal is going to be geschachten, the Klei Shadas will convey Tumah to the meat. So there's the only way is to defer everything to Pesach Sheni. You don't do that. So it's brought betuma. But that's only Elo Shenitma Hasake B'Tmeimes. Look at this. You know what that means? Remember we had these rules in the beginning of the Masechta. Remember the Halal Cherev? Normally when Tumah is conveyed, it goes down one level. Now we have exceptions, right? Zov, Mitzoida, Mishkav, Moishav. There are exceptions. There's an exception, and that is that if the source of Tumah is corpse Tumah, when corpse Tumah is conveyed to a metal utensil, the metal utensil retains the same level of Tumah as the source, as the origin. So if a sword or any metal utensil touches a corpse, what status does that metal utensil have? Avi avois. Similarly, if a person became tamei through a mace, so therefore the person is an av. If the person touches a utensil, what does that utensil become? A metal utensil, not a metal utensil. Even though the Torah speaks about a sword, Chazal say it's not only a cherev, it's any metal utensil. The metal utensil becomes an av, like the level of the person. So we're speaking about the kalim, the sakinim, having contact with a tmei mace, not with the mace, with a tmei mace. So now what level of tumah will these sakinim have? An av. And therefore the kohanim that are going to need to use the chalif, what will the kohanim become? If the chalif is an av, then the people that touch it will become a rishon. So So now, if the kleshares are tamei, then the kohanim are becoming tamei. Now, guys, I know that addition doesn't have to undergo seven days with the hazah shlishi v'shvi. Doesn't matter. But they're shechting it on erev Pesach. They will become tamei. So it's brought betuma. The me'ikara ki misavid betumas aguf the kares ko misavid, which the kohanim are tamei. And normally, when the kohen is tamei, right, the rule is, you have to remember, we had this so many times, it's good to chazer it. There's a difference whether the person is tamei, whether it's a yid, whether it's a kohen, and they're eating kachim or having contact with kachim. That's a lot more serious. If the person is tamei, consuming kachim, chiyuv kares. If the person is tahar, the meat of kachim is tamei, should not have been consumed. The penalty is malchus. It's a lav. It's not kares. So when you have the higher level of problem, the tumas aguf, and we're saying, roif people are tamei, do it betuma, then indeed, then the din stands. Roif kelim are tamei, the Pesach is brought betuma, because it's going to make the kohanim become tamei, and it's going to be brought. But what happens if you have nitma saken betuma sheretz, if the chalif only has rishon, because the chalif, or the majority of the kelim, became tamei with contact with the sheretz. So what status will the saken have? A rishon. Now a rishon, which will now touch the b'sar kachim, will make the b'sar kachim tamei on a level of a sheni. Don't forget, b'sar kachim can become tamei biblically on a level of a shlishi, and even on a revi. Definitely becomes tamei as a sheni. But that saken, which is a rishon, biblically is not metamei the person that touches it. So if the sakinim are tamei by having contact with the sheretz, even though the basarum the metamile on the level of a sheni, but since legavra loy metamile, now will you bring the carbon? Guys, important. Yes. You'll bring the carbon Pesach, even though the karbanos, the meat will become tamei. There's a dispensation. If roiv is tamei, it's brought betuma. But hold on, we are going to say, who is allowed to bring it? Only the Jews that are Tahoidim. The minority Jews who themselves are Tameim will not be able to lean on this dispensation, the Tameim Loyavat. It's even the Torah is allowing us to bring the carbon Pesach when the meat is Tamei. It doesn't automatically mean that the carbon Pesach can be brought by people that are not Tamei. It's if the people are becoming Tamei, so that's the dispensation. Roif Tamei, you bring it. Whenever there's sakinim, the klei shadas that are tameim, even though we will uphold roiv, bring it, but if the roiv that's bringing it is only addressing it, they're only, so to say, being doicha, the tuma of the basar, if they are tahoidim, it will not justify for people that are tamei meis to bring it as well. Mutav yeyachal, betumas basar balav, we allow that. But va'al yochal basar, betumas aguf, which is bekaras. Now, all of that, this is going to be almost the final times, is based on something that we discussed 2 days ago in great length. Another nafkamina, whether we say tuma d'choya b'tzibur or tuma hutra b'tzibur. Once we start splitting here and we say just because a lower level of tuma is overlooked or pushed aside, it doesn't mean we're going to push aside a higher level of tuma. All of that is because we hold that tuma d'choya b'tzibur. So if tuma's d'choya means that tuma's an issue, but sometimes there's something more important than Tumah. So here we're reluctant. No, we're doing something wrong. So Rabbi Chizda says, listen, just because you're doing something that's lesser wrong, you're overlooking a lav, it doesn't mean that you overlook something that normally has an Isur Kares. But if Rabbi Chizda would have learned Tumah is Hutra B'tzibur, then we would not have made such a difference. Once the Torah says that there's a roiv of Tumah, even if it's only Tumah's Basar, but if it's hutra, then even a tamei meis would be allowed to bring it. And b'chein amar Rabbi Yitzchak, tuma d'chuyi b'tzibur. V'Rava Amar, Rava is not arguing with this tuma d'chuya. Rava is saying even if tuma's d'chuya, afilu tameim nami avdei. Oh, no, it's even if the sakinim are tamei b'tuma sheretz. The minority of the people that have tamei meis, the minority bring Pesach Rishon. Why is that? Not because Rav is going to say Tuma Hutra, it's Gavaldik, but because he has a Hekesh. My Tama, because in Parshas Tzav, where we have these two psukim, we have this a lot in Kachim. People get confused that when the person is Tamei and he eats Kachim, it's Chayv Kares. the person is tahar, but the basar is problematic. Lav, those two dinim are quoted in the Torah, one right after the other. So the chsiv, first it says, "V'habasar ashiga b'chol tamei." If the meat is tamei, lo yeyachel. And what do you have to do with the meat? Ba'esh yisareif. And if the meat will be eaten, my friends, then you're going to be chayiv. Then you're going to be chayiv a lav, right? Because the person in this verse is not tamei. The meat is tamei. But then it says in the next pasuk that v'habasar, regarding tahar meat, only a person who starved can eat it. And if the person is tamei, is chayiv kares. Now God puts these two dinim together. So says Rava, you know what we say? Kol hecha, wherever we don't read this verse, where don't we read this? Right now, by Korban Pesach. If we are allowing for the meat to be consumed when the meat is tamei because the sakin was rishon and it made the meat a tamei, if you are already activating the dispensation, then we don't enforce that only tar people can eat it. And therefore the miyuta to make mace could eat it. It's only, says Rabbi, then so Rabbi argues with Rab Chizda, but no one is debating Rab Chizda based on Tumahutra, but yes, because of the sekish. Okay, Nekuda. Now we're starting the second topic until the end of the daf. Roiv. So it says this is a classical Talmudic question. Itmar. What happens if there's no roiv, but there's no miut? There's no majority and there's no minority. It's exactly 50-50. Now there's a lot of nuances to this. But let's begin. Itmar was stated. We're speaking about Tumas Meis. Let's put Rabbi Chizda and Rav aside. Exactly 50-50.
Wouldn't you have to count perfectly? You're allowed to count.
But Baruch, get used to this. It's completely irrelevant whether it ever happened, whether it can ever happen, and maybe one kid passed away. It doesn't matter how they did it. It's not the concept. We're learning a concept. If it's exactly 50-50. Guys, it's a machlokes Rav and Afkahana, but there's two versions in Afkahana. So we got ourselves a three-way machlokes. Rav says, listen to the words. Mechze al mechze kiroiv. Now, each segment is treated like a majority. Ubemela, wait, the Gemara is going to speak it out. So what does that mean? Hold on. Rav Kahana says the words that mechze al mechze, 50-50, no segment is like a majority. What does that mean? So let's speak it out. Rav says, right, 3 lines from the bottom of the Amid, mechze al mechze kiroiv. What does that mean? Halka. Halalu oisin la'atzman v'halalu oisin la'atzman. Gavaldik. Each segment is treated like a majority. So therefore, hold on. When you have 50 of them, 50% is tahor. What do? They bring it betara. Because when roiv is tahor, they have to bring it Pesach Rishon. So they bring it. The other 50%, we view them as a majority. When roiv are tamei, what do? They bring it betuma. The only thing is, we don't want them to mingle. That's the unique chiddush. When the majority bigashmi is tamei, then everyone makes it in one group. And like we learned before this klal, that once you bring it betuma, that you're not machalik the call, you're machalik the call. So we learned before about the 3 groups. L'chaydet means that from each 50%, you do the 3 groups, but you keep them separated. But everyone is going to bring it on Pesach Rishon. Wow. However, Rav Kahana Amar, now guys, there's 2 versions in Rav Kahana. So we're going to call this version number 1. Rav Kahana says, mechze al mechze, each segment is never viewed as a majority. So therefore, hold on, the Tohidim do the Pesach Rishon. That's a chiddush. Why do the Tohidim do the Pesach Rishon? They're not a majority. So who cares? Let's say, my friends, the Tohidim would be a minority. When the majority are Tamei and the minority are Tohidim, when do the Tohidim bring it? Pesach Rishon. No, it's just because they're not roiv, should be no reason for them to be delayed to Pesach Sheni. Even if there would be just a minority to Tohidim, they were bringing in Pesach Rishon. So if they're half, they're not worse than a minority. They're not like a majority, but they're not worse than a minority. So they bring Pesach Rishon. Now, however,
according to Rav, who is doing the Pesach Sheni?
No one. No one will do the Pesach Sheni. Very good. No need. Now, this first version of Kahana and the Tmeim, according to the first version, they have to do a Pesach Sheni. Why? Because since 50% does not legally constitute a majority, so if they're not a majority, so they have to bring a Pesach Sheni. However, the last line of Kahana said a bigger chiddush. First of all, the first part is the same. Each segment is not treated like a majority. So therefore, like we said, the Tohoidim, the 50% exactly, they have to bring the Pesach Rishon because they should not be different than, let's say they're a minority. Tohoidim bring Pesach Rishon always. They bring it. However, the Tameim, the 50% of Tameim, they sadly don't get to bring it at all. Like Jews and Galus. And he explains why. They can't bring the carbon Rishon Liyavde because the loy have ruba. The only time that Tuma is set aside, right, or becomes permitted, B'tzibur, is if Roiv is Tami. There's no Roiv. So if it's not Roiv, they can't bring the Pesach Rishon. However, the second version says Rav Kahana B'Sheni also Liyavde. You know why? Because the only time people bring Pesach Sheni is if they were in the minority. So Rav Kahana is saying it's like Korech Mikan. They're not viewed as a majority, but they're not viewed as a minority. Pesach Sheni is for the minority, not for 50%. So they completely lose out. And now, guys, I know it's a big Amud. It's a very easy Amud. Let me set it by heart by the intro. We're going to quote 3 brises. First, we're going to have a potential question against Rav from the Mishnah. But we're going to quote 3 brises. Each one, mamish, seems to be saying like each one of these 3 opinions. And we could have stopped Shalom al Yisrael. The beauty of this Gemara is it's going to almost always show you how the other Amoraim can even explain the other Tanoim in a way that it doesn't contradict them. But let's go inside. So firstly, a kasha against Rav. It says in our Mishnah, Nitma Kohol, which is everyone, or Rubai, or even though the people are Tohaidim, but we also view the status of the Kohanim, or if the Kohanim were Tameim, even though the Kol are Tohaidim, says the Mishnah, Yaseh Betuma. Now let us be Medayek from we'll call this the ratio of the Mishnah, from the word Rubai. What does that imply? That the Rubai, who of the Betuma? Only Raif. Only when there's a Raif Tuma. But Palga, Lo Yavdi Berishin. Simple. So Kashi Rav answers, no. Ruba of the Kula Betuma, which is clear, like we said in the Mishnah. Once the Roiv are Tameh, everyone brings it, even the ones who are Tohoidim, and they bring it together. They might become Tameh, we don't care. However, Palga, then they tackle, all bring it, but not together. Halal Oisam La'atzman, Halal Oisam La'atzman. Says the Gemara, not only is this not a kasha against Rav, but actually, if you look in the Seifa, it has to be that way. And it has to be that way would be a kasha against Rav Kahana. So Hachanam is Tabra, because since it says in the Seifa that Nitma Miut HaKol, it's always that way, make the inference from the Miut. If the minority of the Kol are Tamei, then the Tohoidim make the Rishain, Utemeim Oisem Hasheni, end of quote. So let's make the same inference. Says the Gemara, Miut to the Avdi B'Sheni, only if there was a minority, right, Tameim, do they bring it in the Sheni, which implies, Abo Palga, if half and half, then the half that were Tameim don't bring the Pesach Sheni. Nervous then, what do they do? V'avdi Berishain. Now, you have Tameim and Tohoidim, so you don't bring them together. So actually, in order for there to not to be a stira from the inference, from the nation, and from the Seifa, Punkt Fakert, Rav works perfectly, but now Vakasha Rav Kahana, and it goes on both versions, and the Gemara is going to speak it out. You'll see how this is going to be resolved. So you'll understand, instead of speaking out how it's a kasha on both, let's read the answer. So Amal Rav Kahana. This is the way we're going to learn the Seifa. Nitmu miyut kohol, the Seifa. Then the Mishnah says, we're quoting the Mishnah. Tohoidim make the Rishain, and the Tmei make the Sheni. Okay, let's make an inference, which implies palgo, tohoidim oisem esadishoin. This is the second version. Avol temeim einam oisim lo yasadishim lo yasasheni. That inference is just as good. That's the way he will teach the Sefer. Now, hold on. Hatinach l'shnabasa Rav Kahana elo lahach lishna, which is the first version. The Amar Rav Kahana tohoidim oisem esadishim and temeim oisem esasheni. The Mishnah and the Seifa is implying that only when the miut were tameim, does the miyud bring the Pesach Sheni, which l'chora means if it's mechza al mechza, they don't bring the Pesach Sheni. The first version of Rav Kahana was that the half tameim do bring the Pesach Sheni. Ma'yikelo meimar amalach Rav Kahana. No. Hu adin dafilu palgo. This is the first version. Nami, the Hoirim will bring the Rishon, and the Tameim will bring the Sheni. Why does the Mishnah in the Sefer write Miyud HaKohol, which L'choira Taka means only Miyud brings, but not half? So this is a classical answer. I did the Tana Reisha. Rubai, Tana Nami Sefer Miyutoi, or the Sefer, in order for it to be symmetrical with the Reisha. Now, the Reisha, you needed to write the Roiv. So we write in the Sefer Roiv, even though Lav Dafka Roiv. Even half and half, according to the first version, the half Tameim will bring the Pesach Sheni. Says the Gemara Tanya Kavasa de Rav and Tanya Kavasa de Rav Kahana. Not only like one version, but Ketrei Lishna. So we're going to quote three braises. We're going to number them to simplify, not to get confused as we continue in this sugya. Braisa number one, Tanya Kavasa de Rav says, Hoyu Yisrael Mechza Toirim Mechza Tameim. Halolu Oisim La'atzman V'Halolu Oisim La'atzman. Clearly. Because everyone brings the Pesach Rishon. It's almost clear, right? It's amazing how we're going to figure out how Rav Kahana and that's it. Nukuda. No one brings the Pesach Sheni. Braisa number two, Tanya Kalishna Kama de Rav Kahana, and this Braisa number two is going to be again Bechora, exactly the first version of Rav Kahana says in the Braisa. Yisrael Mechza Toirim Mechza Tameim. So what happens? Says the Braisa, Tohoirim bring the Rishon, Tameim bring the Sheni. It's mamash so clear. And now number three, the Tanya Kalishna Masa Rav Kahana, Harei Shoy Yisrael Mechza Toirim Mechza Tameim. Tohoirim brings the Rishon. Utameim ein oisim lo yasa Rishon v'lo yasa Sheni. End of the narrow lines. Now normally the Gemara would have stopped here. So Nishka Farlach, you have a Machlekas Amoyra, you have a Machlekas Tanoim. Each Tana picks a Braisa. The beauty here is that we're going to analyze almost all the Braisas can go according to everyone. And the Gemara is going in the following order. We're going to begin analyzing the second Braisa. The second Braisa seems to be saying like the Lishna Kalma of Rav Kahana. Says the Gemara, I want you to know that Rav and the Lishna Basra of Rav Kahana will both claim that the second Braisa goes according to their sheet. And let me tell you one point, and then everything will be inside. The one point is like this. When we speak about, not technically, how do we count the people? I want to ask halachically, whom are we counting? What's the question? Are we only counting the men, or are we counting the men and the women? Are women obligated to bring the Pesach, or are women only allowed to? They're permitted to bring the Korban Pesach. That will have a big effect. If women are obligated to bring their Pesach, and then another nuance, are they obligated to bring the Pesach Sheni also? That's another extension of this question, but let's just a concept. So all of a sudden, we're going to start the hacking. We're going to put it over here. Not hacking, beautifully. We're going to put it over here that when we speak about half and half, there's another part of the Braisa that's not mentioned explicitly that we have to understand and put in ourselves. And it will have everything to do with whether women are obligated, so therefore their status of Tum and Tara will be included in the count, or whether women have the mitzvah of bringing it, but they're not obligated, so their status won't change that count of Roiv Tahoirim, Roiv Tameim, Mechzal Mechzal. Let's read it inside. Ho the Tana, the second Braisa that writes, says half and half, the Tahoirim do the Rishon, and the Tameim do the Sheni. So Heichem et Hartzala. This is not like the Rav. Rav says that they brought through Pesach Rishon. Not like Rav Kahana Lishna Basra that says that the Tameim don't do it at all. No, explains the Gemara, second to medium line. Kagoim, what happened was like this. Yisrael were taking Mechza Tameim. But let me explain what that means. That if you were only to count the men, you would have Roiv Tohoirim. The majority of the men were Tohoirim. The reason why we're calling this a case of half and half was because the Nashim Mashlimois Litameim, because only when you also include the woman, you counted men and women, now you came to 50-50. This Tana holds that Nashim B'Rishayin is only the Shus. They are allowed to participate. And if they were pre-registered, they're going to eat it. And they get a mitzvah, but they're not obligated. It's only optional. It's not obligatory. So therefore, even though you counted the woman and you concluded that you have 50-50, be'emes, halachically, you don't have 50-50. Because if you only count the men, because nashim barishoin rishus, then like we mentioned, the case here was that the roiv of the men are to hoidim. So dal nashim mitameim, you have to really take out the women. And therefore, the case, again, of this brayso was that the roiv of men were to hoidim. So you know why the group that are Tomei, you know why they bring the Pesach Sheni? Because the Miuta brings Pesach Sheni. And this, by the way, will be both Larav and Rav Kahana. Now let's analyze the third brayso. It's going to be another detail of this, one way or the other way, but it's all contingent on that there were women involved here, and the question halachically will be whether they are counted, whether they're not counted. Now let's analyze the third brayso, which appeared like Lishna Basra. And Hadatanya, now we're quoting again the third brayso, not to forget it, or for people like us that we have to know it. The Hoirim Oisim Esadishon. Utameim, it says clearly, Ein Oisim Esadishon V'Loyasasheni. Hey Chametartzala, what are you talking about? So now the one answer won't go for both. Here we'll have to give each one their own answer. Rav Mitaritzla. The case here was Kagoin Shehoyu, Yisrael, Mechza Tameim, Umechza Tohidim. Only counting the men was 50-50. When you add the women, not that all the women were Tohidim, but when you add it all together, then you have Roiv Tohidim. The Noshim Oitvois Ala Tohidim. When you include the women, then the Tameim cannot bring the Pesach Sheni. Let's go to Rav. What does Rav hold? Don't forget, Rav holds Mechza al Mechza. Everyone brings the Pesach Rishon. And Rav holds that this Tana holds that women are obligated to bring the Pesach Rishon, but they are only allowed to, right? It's only optional for them to bring the Pesach Sheni. So let's halk up now. So when it comes to Pesach Rishon, since they're obligated, so now Barishon lo yavdi. Why not? Because even though only counting the men would be a case of 50-50, Rav holds, this Tana holds, you have to count the women because they have to bring it. When you counted the women, Roiv were Tohidim. So therefore, the Tameim cannot bring the Pesach Rishon, the Habalei Miyut. Umiyut lo yavde berishon. So hold on. So why now will they not bring the Sheni? The third brayso says they don't bring anything, Gavaldi. Because now those who were Tamei Ubisheni, they also cannot bring it. Why can they not bring it? Because as far as Pesach Sheni is concerned, you can't include the women. Now you have to take out the woman. Dal Noshin Minayu. When you take out the woman, what was the case of the men? Like we said, half and half. What does Rav hold half and half? No one brings the Pesach Sheni Shloimeh. When it's half and half, there's no Pesach Sheni. That's why Upagal of the Sheni. Amazing. Now hold on. What about Rav Kahana? We're speaking about the first version. Rav Kahana, the first version, holds that Mechza al Mechza, the half, will bring the Pesach Sheni. Oh, so he's going to learn that what happened over here was, so the case of the Brayso was that the Yidden were Mechza Tohidim u'Mechza Tameim. And let's go again. Really? If you would have only counted the men, you would have Roiv that are Tamei. Roiv that are Tamei. Narvas then. How did you get to 50-50? Because you are adding the women. When you add the woman, now you have 50-50. So the women bring up the number 50-50. Without the women, Roiv men are Tameim. Rav Kahana holds, that this Tana holds, because of that Nashim b'Rishayna Choiva. So therefore you taka add them. You add them to the count. If they are obligated, they are included. However, like Rav before, Rav Kahana holds that women don't have an obligation to bring the Pesach Sheni. They could, optional, but not obligatory. So let's halka. So Barishain, right? Since with the women you have Roif Tohirim, so the Tameim cannot bring the Rishon. So Barishain Layavdi, right? Tahabaluhu, Palga, Apalga, because you include the women. If you include the women, then the Tameim cannot bring it. If you would not have included the women, since Roiv of the men are Tameim, then everyone would have brought Pesach Rishon. But you have to include the women. Upalga, now what about the Sheni? Why does the third Brayso say they don't bring it b'Sheni? B'Sheni namani avda, because again, since according to Rav Kahana, women are only optionally allowed to bring the Pesach Sheni. They're not mechuyev. So now you have to count again. We're not counting them now. We're counting as they were in Pesach Rishon, but for the Pesach Sheni. So dal noshim minayim. Now you only count them in. So now you have to meim ruba. The ruba lo yavda b'sheni. Because now you're going to have roiv tameim. Roiv tameim never bring Pesach Sheni. And now the third one we won't succeed. In other words, the first Braisa, Mamash said like Rav. And now that will be, so to say, a question on both the first and on the second version of Rav Kahana. So says the Gemara, Ul Rav Kahana, meaning both versions of Rav Kahana. Had the Tanya and Braisa number 1. That Haresha Yisrael, Mechza Tohoidim, guys, the first widest line. Mechza Tameim. Mamash says the words of Rav. Halolo oisim la'atzman, v'halolo oisim la'atzman. Heichim etaretz la. Indeed, Amaloch Rav Kahana. Here I got to pick up my hands. Tanoi al moidich ben moidem. That Rav Kahana will have to admit that this Tana is not their opinion. They are allowed to take another opinion because it's a machlekes Tanoim. They can side with the other Tanoim. That ikelamanda amar mechza al mechza kuroiv, which is Braisa number 1, which is the Braisa which Rav leans on. However, v'ikelamanda amar mechza al mechza eina kuroiv, as we have 2 other Braisas, and Rav Kahana has the right to follow that opinion. Gufa, we learned about the Braisa. Haresha Yisrael, Mechza Tohoidim, or Mechza Tameim. Halal oisam la'atzman, v'halal oisam la'atzman. It's only when Tameim are oitvan al Tohoidim, that is the din of the Mishnah. It's only when there's roiv Tameim, then what? Then everyone brings it in Pesach Rishon. But let's get back into the numbers. Now that we spoke about exactly 50-50, what happens if it's not exactly 50-50, but the Tameim are more numerous than the Tohoidim by one? So you have 600,000 Eden, so it's 300,001 that are Tameim. And it's only -1. So it says the Tanakama, afilu echad, even if the roiv Tameim is only by 1, yasu betuma, the power of one Yid. The power of one Yid. When the roiv of Yidden live in Eretz Yisrael, Tuma to Trumas and Maasros is biblical. Imagine at the time, this is in our life, maybe it happened already, or if not, it's about to happen, that it's exactly half and half. When one Yid goes to Eretz Yisrael, now you have roiv, Trumas and Maasros midoy raisa, v'chahena rabbis, 9, 10, the power of one Yid. However, and once you activate, the word is once you activate Pesach betuma, then everyone brings it together. When we are activating the dispensation of bringing it to Tuma, it will never be divided. However, Masya holds, no. Ein hayachid machrias atzibur lituma. This is so similar to Sanhedrin. Remember that? That if you are trying someone, and if he'll be found guilty, he'll be put to capital death in a Beis Din, and by Sanhedrin, there you don't have a majority of 1 is not enough. There are times in Torah that get roiv, but roiv doesn't mean only by 1. Or in English, simple majority is not enough. Not that you need to have 2/3. In Torah we have a concept you have to have 2 or more. That if there's only yachid, letara, yeah. But letuma for negative, it's amazing. Meruba mido toiva. That if it's letuma, 1 cannot tip the scale. That means that even if you have 1 more...
Isn't that tipping the scale actually better for everybody? Because then everybody gets to bring the Koren Pesach.
Okay, you want to word it that way, fine. But let's first come to the number. 1 second. But if it doesn't tip the scale, do you know what it's called? It's called mechza al mechza. Just to go back to that. And the mechza al mechza, we just had the 3-way machlekes. Good. And where does he take it from? Shenema, daf pei on the top. When it says in Parshas Ri'eh, Loi suchal lizboyach es haposach ba'achat sha'arecha. Literally, it means that the Koren Pesach, even though before we had a Mishkan, and there were times that even after we had the Mishkan, right, we went through the 14 years when we were in Gilgal, the 57 years in between Mishkan Shiloi and David HaMelech establishing the Aron HaKodesh in Yerushalayim. There were periods where there was a heter b'mos. The Torah is saying that a Koren Pesach may not be brought on a bama. That's the pshat, that you can't bring the Pesach in any sha'arecha. It has to be brought in the Mizbeach. That's the pshat. And here again, we have the drush. The drush is, look at Rashi. It's a Chassidish drasha that loisucha l'sboich as a Pesach be'echad, not ba'achat shorecha. Take out the word shorecha. You can't bring the Pesach because of one. In other words, like Danny, like you're saying, if roiv are tamei, everyone brings it now. Here you have roiv that are tamei, but if the roiv is only from a one majority, then loisucha l'sboich as a Pesach. Okay, that's one machlokes. We'll learn one more. We're gonna leave off the middle of the brais. Another issue. This is why, guys, we're learning a brayso. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Stam Rab Shimon is the Rashbi. Let's go to Roiv. What happens? The Yidden are divided into 12 tribes. What happens if you are to look at each tribe individually? One Shevet has majority of their members Tameim. Afilu Shevet Echad Tamei, V'shar Kol Hashvatim Tohirim. And if you would have counted the totality of the Jewish people, you would have Roiv Tohirim. But when you count that tribe has Roiv Tameim. Says Rab Shimon, Halalu oisim la'atzman v'halalu oisim la'atzman. That you get to look at each tribe individually. And yet, Danny, that's a leniency. Again, I like that. In other words, when you bring it, you could look at it at the other way, that you're bringing it the Tumah. But especially if you hold that Tumah is Hutra. And even if it's the Chuya, they're bringing it on the right time. Now, my Tama, because Rab Shimon holds Shevad Echad Ikre Kol. And you know where we have this? Where we're going to have this again? Sechta Hoirius. Right, the whole din that if Beis Din gives a ruling, and the majority of the people follow the ruling. Remember the Par Helen Dover Shel Tzibur. So what is the call? So we have this concept that we can look at each Shevet individually, and so holds Rab Shimon. What we're going to continue tomorrow, I just say about Rabbi Yehuda has a bigger novelty. Rabbi Yehuda says that if the roiv of one Shevet is tummy, not only does he agree with Rab Shimon, so that Shevet gets to bring it to Tumah. Now that Shevet gets to bring it to Tumah, everyone else can bring it with them. And we're going to continue that with tomorrow. So Rab Shimon is simple. You judge every Shevet separately. The dinim of roiv apply to one Shevet. Now, Rab Shimon is not opining, how do you define roiv? That's the machlekes Tanach and Abelazar ben Masya. No, does roiv mean to have a majority of two or more? Or do you even allow a majority of one? That's another machlekes. But Rab Shimon is saying that you get to look at
or if women are included as well. That's
another machlekes, right? Or a woman included as well. Beautiful. To be continued. All right.
Go ahead.
A guten Chevra.